want to begin today with a warm hello to all of you, my fellow travelers in the landscapes of story, image, and meaning. You've joined me again here at Cinema Vault, and that already tells me something about you. That you're not here for quick takes or box office gossip, but for something deeper, for the conversations that linger long after the credits roll, and for the ideas that follow us back into our lives, reshaping how we see the world. If you haven't yet, I would be genuinely grateful if you like this video and subscribe. Not because numbers are everything, but because this little corner of the internet grows richer with each new mind and heart that joins in. And today, we're doing something slightly different. An exploration of How to Train Your Dragon, 2025. Not as a straightforward review, but as a kind of literary excavation. This isn't about telling you whether to see it or not. It's about peeling back the layers, letting the light catch the threads of myth and metaphor woven through it, and maybe seeing how those threads connect to the loom of our own lives. I should say this clearly. This isn't a real review in the traditional sense. It's a theoretical, intellectual analysis, a work of interpretation for an audience that loves literature, philosophy, and the timeless craft of storytelling. If you've ever left the cinema feeling the way you do after finishing a great novel, quiet, a little shaken, and somehow more awake, then you're exactly who I'm speaking to. What strikes me first about this story is its way of making the familiar feel sacred again. We think we know the shape of it. A boy, a dragon, a friendship that changes them both. But here, it's treated almost as if it were a fragment of ancient folklore rediscovered and retold. Not merely updated with modern visual effects, but reframed with a voice that respects the mythic heart beating at its center. It made me think of those old epic poems we use to analyze line by line in university. The ones where a single word choice could carry centuries of meaning. This film feels aware of that weight, and it leans into it. The opening moments are quiet. Quieter than you'd expect for something that will eventually take us to skies roaring with wind and flame. There's a deliberate patience to the way it unfolds, as though the story wants us to feel the scale of the world before we're caught in its drama. I remember sitting in the theater thinking of my own childhood, when I'd lie on my back in the grass and watch clouds drift across the sky, imagining they were the wings of some ancient creature passing overhead. That same sensation of longing for something vast and unreachable seemed to hum beneath every frame. And then there's the texture of the world itself. The filmmakers have built a setting that feels lived in, not just visually, but in the way people speak to each other, in the small domestic rituals tucked between grand events. A fisherman mending a net while listening to wind, a mother marking a child's height on a doorframe, an elder telling a half-forgotten tale by the fire. These things ground the fantasy in a reality we can touch. And because of that, the moments of wonder later on feel earned rather than manufactured. Without giving too much away, the plot moves with a rhythm that feels almost musical. It begins in a minor key, uncertainty, distrust, the sense that something is about to change but hasn't yet found its shape. The relationship at the heart of the story grows not through grand gestures, but through the slow accumulation of small, careful choices. There's hesitation at first, and even a sense of danger, because, of course, to approach the unknown is to risk being changed by it. But the way that change unfolds is, to me, one of the most beautiful aspects of the film. There's a moment, early enough that I can mention it, without spoiling much, where the main character reaches out a hand, palm open, and waits. No words, no demands, just patience. And in that pause, I felt an entire philosophy crystallize. It's the idea that understanding is not seized but invited. That connection requires not only courage but humility. In literature, we often talk about the turning point, that subtle shift in a character's inner life that redirects the course of the entire story. Here, that turning point is almost invisible, but it echoes through everything that follows. As for the narrative arc, it's more than just a hero's journey. There's an awareness of cycles, of generations passing, of knowledge being lost and found again. It reminded me of something my grandfather once said when I asked why he told me the same story so many times. He smiled and said, "Because one day you'll need it, and you won't remember hearing it the first time." This film carries that same sense, that what we learn now may not reveal its true worth until years later. There are, of course, moments of spectacle. To pretend otherwise would be dishonest. The flight sequences, for instance, are breathtaking, not merely because of the visual beauty, but because of how they're framed. They're not shown as easy triumphs, but as acts of trust. Every leap into the sky is a question. Will we fall or will we fly? That uncertainty makes each ascent feel miraculous. And then come the turns in the road, the places where the story pivots into something unexpected. One twist in particular left me still in my seat long after credits began, thinking about how neatly it tied back to the themes seated in the first act. It's the sort of twist that doesn't feel like a gimmick, but like the inevitable conclusion to a truth we didn't yet have a language to name. I won't spoil it, but I will say that it made me reconsider not only what I thought the characters wanted, but what they truly needed. What stayed with me most, though, was the undercurrent of loss running through it. Not the loud, cinematic kind of loss, but the quieter so we recognize from real life. The knowledge that growth often means letting go, and that love is sometimes measured not in what we keep, but in what we're willing to release. I think that's why it resonated so deeply for me. I've had to say my own goodbyes to people and chapters one wanted to hold on to forever. Watching that truth woven into the story felt like someone had taken a private ache of mine and translated it into a language I could see and hear. The craftsmanship here is worth pausing over. The dialogue is sparse when it needs to be, letting silence carry its own meaning. There are lines that sound simple, but reveal more each time you turn them over in your mind. The score swells and recedes like a tide, never overwhelming the scene, but always guiding the emotional current. And the use of light. The light. There are sequences where the sky shifts from storm gray to molten gold, and you can almost feel the temperature change. It's as if the film is constantly reminding us that beauty and danger often share the same horizon. I found myself thinking, too, about the way the story handles fear. In so many tales, fear is an enemy to be conquered. But here, fear is something else. It's a teacher. It asks us to listen closely, to respect boundaries, to move forward without arrogance. There's a scene in which a character admits they are afraid, and instead of being shamed for it, they're told, "Good. That means you know this matters." I wish more stories, both on screen and on the page, treated fear with that kind of nuance. By the time the final act arrived, I realized I wasn't just invested in the characters. I was invested in the world they inhabited. I wanted to know the stories behind every face in the crowd, every carving on every doorframe. That's the mark of storytelling done well. When the world feels bigger than what we're shown, and you leave the theater feeling like life in that place will go on unseen, but no less real. When the ending came, it didn't try to tie every thread into a neat bow. Some questions were answered, others left hanging in the air like the last note of a song. I think that's fitting. In life, we rarely get perfect closure, and in art, I believe it's often better to leave a little room for the audience to step in, to add their own final brushstroke to the picture. Walking out into the night after it was over, I felt that strange mix of fullness and longing. Fullness because the story had given me so much to hold on to, images, ideas, emotions that would keep resurfacing in the days ahead. Longing because part of me wanted to go back in, to live in that world just a little longer, to see what might happen if I lingered by the fire or looked up at the clouds with that same childlike wonder. Maybe that's why stories like this endure. They remind us of the parts of ourselves that the everyday world often forgets to feed. The parts that crave not just entertainment, but connection, meaning a glimpse of something larger than our own narrow paths. And when a story can give us that, it stops being just a story. It becomes, in its own way, a kind of homecoming. So, to you, my fellow lovers of words, images, and the spaces between them, thank you for sitting with me in this reflection. I hope you find your own ways to carry its themes into your life, whether that's in the form of a conversation, a quiet walk, or simply a moment of stillness where you let the wind tell you its own tale. And if you ever find yourself reaching out into the unknown, palm open, I hope you do it with patience, courage, and a belief that something extraordinary might reach back. There's a kind of magic in beginnings, isn't there? They rarely announce themselves. We expect the opening of a grand story to arrive with trumpets, with firelight, with something unmistakable to tell us, pay attention, this is important. But often it's quieter, almost hidden, the way a season changes not in a single dramatic shift, but in 100 small, almost invisible steps. That's how this one begins. It opens on a coastline caught between dawn and daylight. The sky is still half asleep, its blues heavy with the memory of night, and the water rolls in slow, deliberate breaths. There's a village there, tucked into the curve of the shore, its rooftop stained with salt and years. The first thing you notice isn't the people but the sound, the distant cry of gulls, the whisper of nets dragging across sand, the low creak of wooden masts swaying with the tide. It's a world that feels old before we even meet anyone in it, as though it's been telling stories to itself for centuries. The boy is the first human face we see, though boy might not be quite right. He's at that age where youth is still written across his features, but there's a stubborn set to his jaw that hints at the man he's straining to become. He moves differently from the others, while the villagers move and practice rhythms, hauling fish, repairing sails, trading news. He keeps glancing at the horizon, as if expecting something to break it open. You get the sense that he's searching for something no one else can see. The villagers speak in murmurs when he passes. Not cruel, not mocking, just cautious. There's history here, an unspoken rule that the boy has already learned to walk around. The camera, in its quiet way, follows him to the far edge of the village, where the land rises into a spine of cliffs. From up here, the ocean looks endless, and the wind carries the scent of something wild and untamed. It's here that the first sign of what's to come arrives, not with the thunder of wings or the roar of fire, but with a shadow, a flicker that cuts across the sunlight in a way no gull or cloud could. The boy looks up. The screen doesn't show us what he sees, just his eyes widening, the small involuntary step backward. Then it's gone. The wind swallows a moment, but something in him has already shifted. He returns to the village, but the day feels different now. He tries to join the others in their work, helping an old man mend a torn sail, carrying a basket of fish to market, but his mind keeps drifting back to the cliffs, to the shadow that didn't belong. When night falls, he can't sleep. The moon spills silver across the rooftops, and the sea below seems to whisper in a language just beyond comprehension. He decides to follow it. The path back to the cliffs is darker now, the wind sharper. Each step feels heavier, as though the world itself is asking him to turn back. But curiosity is a stubborn flame. At the cliff's edge, he waits. Minutes pass, then hours. The screen holds on his face, lit only by the moon, and just when we're about to believe nothing will happen. There it is again. This time, the shadow moves against the moonlight, and in that impossible silhouette, we understand what's been calling him. The next morning, the village is buzzing. Something happened during the night. Livestock missing, fences torn, the scent of smoke carried in from the hills. The elders gather in the meeting hall, voices low but urgent. We catch fragments of their talk, warnings, stories from years past, talk of keeping to the old ways. The boy listens from the doorway, heart pounding. Over the next days, the tension in the village grows. Nets are hauled and empty. Tools left outside in the fields are found twisted and broken. The old stories, tales the boy had grown up half-believing, begin to resurface. And then one afternoon, when the sky is heavy with the promise of rain, it happens. A scream from the far edge of the village. People scatter, shouting. The boy runs toward the sound and finds himself in the clearing just in time to see it. The creature, massive, scaled, eyes like molten gold. Its wings fold and unfold with a slow, deliberate grace, each movement sending tremors through the ground. For a moment, everything is still. Then chaos. Villagers rush forward with ropes, nets, anything they can find. The creature surges upward, wings tearing through the air, and in the confusion, the boy is knocked to the ground. When he looks up, he sees something the others don't. The creature is injured, a long gash along its side, the edges blackened as though by fire. It stumbles in the air, barely making it past the tree line before vanishing into the hills. The villagers cheers retreat, but the boy can't join them. He's already thinking about the way it moved, the pain hidden in its strength. That night, he makes a decision that will change everything. Armed with little more than a small lantern, some food, and the faintest memory of the path the creature took, he slips away from the village. The forest beyond the hills is a different world. Damp earth, shadows that seem to watch, the occasional flash of eyes in the underbrush. Hours pass before he finds what he's looking for. The creature lies curled in a shallow cave, breathing raggedly. Up close, it's even more magnificent and more dangerous than he imagined. Every instinct tells him to turn back. Instead, he kneels just outside the cave, setting down the food. He doesn't speak, doesn't reach out, just waits. The creature's gaze fixes on him, unblinking. Minutes stretch into an eternity before it shifts, ever so slightly, toward the offering. Over the days that follow, this becomes a ritual. He comes at dawn or dusk, always keeping his distance, always leaving something behind. The villagers begin to notice his absences, but he deflects their questions. His secret feels too fragile to share. And yet, with each visit, the space between them grows smaller, not just physically, but in the unspoken trust forming between boy and creature. Then comes the moment, the one that will live in his memory forever. He arrives to find the creature standing at the edge of the clearing, wings folded, waiting. Slowly, almost without realizing it, he steps forward, closing the last few feet between them. He extends his hand, open, unarmed. The creature leans forward, the heat of its breath warm against his skin. And in that silent, suspended second, something ancient and unbreakable passes between them. Back in the village, life grows more unsettled. The elders speak of strange signs, storms arriving out of season, flocks flying in unnatural patterns, the sea itself growing restless. Some blame the boy, though they can't quite say why. He hears whispers when he walks past, feels the weight of eyes on him. But by now, the line between his world and the creature's has blurred. He can't go back to who he was before. The turning point arrives with the storm. It comes without warning. Winds that tear through the village, waves that batter the shore, lightning splitting the sky. In the chaos, the boy is separated from the others, swept toward the cliffs. And there, through the sheets of rain, he sees it, his friend, the creature, fighting against the wind, wings straining, eyes locked on him. What happens next is part instinct, part trust. The creature dips low, just enough for the boy to grab hold, and then there in the air, soaring through the storm, the village falling away beneath them. For the first time, he feels what it's like to fly, not in dreams, not in imagination, but in reality. And though the storm still rages, there's a sense that something larger has just begun. The wind that night seemed determined to test every bond in the world, between earth and sky, between land and sea, and for him, between boy and creature. High above the storm-tossed waves, he clung to the ridged curve of his back, the rain stinging his face in sharp, needle-like bursts. It was impossible to know where they were headed. The darkness was almost complete, broken only by the flash of lightning illuminating the stretch of wings that seemed to fill the horizon. When they finally broke through the heart of the storm, the world felt suddenly too still, as though they had slipped into a hidden space where the rules were different. Beneath them lay a valley he had never seen before, a bowl of green cradled between jagged cliffs, with a river curling through it like a silver thread. The creature descended in slow spirals, its breathing still rough in the effort, until they landed on a mossy slope at the valley's edge. It was only then that he let go, staggering slightly as his feet met the earth again. The air here was warmer, heavy with the scent of wildflowers and damp stone. All around them, faint shapes moved in the darkness, shapes that, as his eyes adjusted, resolved into other creatures. Not just one, dozens, maybe more. They watched him in utter silence, their eyes glowing faintly in the half-light. He realized, with a kind of awe, that his companion was not alone, not an outcast, not the last of its kind as he had secretly feared. It had a kin, a community, hidden away from the human world. The knowledge was dizzying. For weeks, he had thought of their friendship as something fragile, rare, almost impossible. Now it was part of something larger, something that had existed long before him, and would endure long after. In the days that followed, the valley became a kind of second home. The creatures accepted his presence, if not fully, then at least without open hostility. He began to notice their language, not just the roars and cries, but the subtle gestures, the way a wing would tilt to signal reassurance, the way a tail would sweep to indicate a warning. His friend, he had stopped thinking of it as anything else, often stayed close, guiding him, making sure the others understood he was no threat. But the outside world had not forgotten him. Back in the village, his absence during the storm had not gone unnoticed. The elders, faced with the damage left behind, flooded homes, ruined boats, missing livestock, had begun weaving their own story. In it, he was not a boy caught in the storm, but one who had led the danger to their door, and they decided that something had to be done. He didn't know this at first. He only learned of it when one morning, as the mist still clung to the valley floor, his friend grew restless. The other creatures lifted their heads, sending something on the wind. Then came the sound, distant at first, then nearer, the harsh, clattering rhythm of human voices, of weapons striking against shields. He ran to the ridge and saw them, a group from the village, armed with nets, spears, and the grim determination of people who believe they're saving themselves. His heart sank. He knew there would be no talking them out of what they had come to do. The confrontation was inevitable. The humans advanced cautiously at first, startled by the sight of so many creatures, but fear turned to aggression quickly. Spears were raised, nets unfurled. The creatures responded with defensive displays, wings flaring, tails lashing the ground, but held their ground. And then, as so often happens when fear meets fear, someone moved too soon. A spear was thrown. What followed was chaos. The valley erupted into motion, creatures taking to the air, humans shouting, the clash of instinct and intent ringing out across the cliffs. He tried to reach the elders, shouting over the noise, but was pulled back by the sweep of a wing as his friend shielded him from another attack. It might have ended in tragedy then, and there if not for what happened next. From deep within the cliffs came a sound unlike anything they had heard before, a low, resonant roar that seemed to shake the air itself. The fighting stopped as every head turned toward the sound. From the shadows emerged a creature larger than any of the others, its scales dull with age, its wings bearing the scars of countless battles. The old one moved slowly, but with a gravity that demanded attention. It stepped between the two groups, fixing each in turn with a gaze that felt ancient and unyielding. Then it turned to him, not to the elders, not to its own kin, just to him. And in that moment, he understood what it wanted. A choice. He could side with the humans, go back to the safety of the village, and preserve the world he had known. Or he could stand with the creatures, knowing it would mean leaving that life behind forever. The weight of it pressed down on him, but deep down, he already knew his answer. He stepped forward, placing himself between the villagers and the creatures. His voice shook at first, but steadied as he spoke. Not to defend himself, but to remind them of something they had forgotten, that their own survival had always depended on coexistence, not conquest. He told them about the injury, about the trust built in the quiet days, about how much more there was to the world than what lay within the village boundaries. The elders listened, but their faces remained hard. It was the old creature who broke the stalemate. With a slow, deliberate gesture, it lowered its head to him, an unmistakable sign of respect. The others followed suit, one by one, until the valley was filled with the sound of wings folding and heads bowing. The message was clear. He was one of them now. The villagers left without another spear thrown, but not without cost. As they disappeared over the ridge, he knew there would be no place for him in their world anymore. The bridge had been burned, not in anger, but in the quiet, irreversible way that sometimes happens when paths diverge. In the days that followed, life in the valley resumed its rhythm, but his place within it deepened. He learned to ride not just with his friend, but with others, each with its own temperament and skill. He discovered hidden places, the crystalline caves where the youngest creatures were sheltered, the high, wind-swept plateaus where the elders gathered in council. And yet, there was an unease in the air. The storm that had driven him here was not an isolated event. The weather grew stranger, the seas rougher. Even the creatures seemed to sense something on the horizon. It was his friend who finally showed him. A fissure deep in the cliffs where the river met the sea, a place where the water churned as if fighting itself. Beneath it, the glint of something unnatural. They dove together, the cold closing around them like a fist. What they found was not the work of nature, but of humans, a trap designed to seal the valley from the sea, cutting the creatures off from the migration routes they had followed for generations. He realized with a chill that the storm had not been a warning from the sky, but the first consequence of this blockade. The decision was clear. The barrier had to be destroyed, but it wouldn't be simple. The structure was massive, reinforced with steel, guarded by currents strong enough to crush anything unprepared. For days, he and his friend planned, learning the currents, watching the tide, gathering what they would need. The night they chose was moonless. They moved like shadows through the water, timing each surge of the tide to drive them closer to the barrier. The first strike came from his friend, a blast of fire in the cold depths, steam boiling upward in a violent cloud. He followed with the tools he had taken from the village long ago, wedging them into the steel, working them loose as the water fought to pull them away. Piece by piece, the barrier began to give, but the noise had drawn attention. From the surface came lights, human lights, growing brighter, faster. He worked faster, lungs burning, as his friend circled to keep the boats at bay. The last section of steel gave way with a sound that seemed to echo even underwater, and then the current surged forward, pulling the wreckage out to sea. They surfaced just in time to see the first of the migrating creatures appear in the distance, dark shapes against the starlit water, drawn home now that the way was clear. It was a sight he knew he would never forget. By the time they returned to the valley, dawn was breaking. The others gathered to greet the returning kin, their calls rising a chorus that seemed to shake the cliffs themselves. His friend landed beside him, and for a moment they simply stood there, watching the sky fill with wings. There was no ceremony, no formal acknowledgement of what had been done, but as the sun rose higher, he felt something shift in him. This was no longer a place he had stumbled into by chance. It was his home, and these were no longer just creatures. They were his people. In the days that followed, the memory of the village grew distant. He thought of them sometimes, of the elders, of the boy he had been, but without regret. The path he had chosen was hard, yes, but it was his. And in the quiet moments, standing on the cliffs with the wind in his hair and the sea stretching out before him, he knew he would not trade it for anything. The rain-soaked streets of Seoul seemed to mirror the lives of those who inhabit them, complex, layered, and often shrouded in shadows. Every major figure in this tale is carved out of contradictions, carrying masks that slip only in rare moments of vulnerability. Their choices are not dictated by morality alone, but by need, fear, loyalty, and the haunting memories of past decisions. They live in a world where one's public face and private soul can be two entirely different beings, each fighting for dominance. At the center stands Kim Haiju, a woman whose outward appearance suggests poise and gentle grace, but whose inner life is a turbulent ocean. She is a mother who wants to shield her child from the darkness, yet her own life is intertwined with dangerous secrets she cannot easily untangle from. Her strength lies in her ability to adapt. She can face a situation with quiet resilience, even when it shakes her to her core. Yet beneath that resilience lies a deep loneliness, a longing for someone to understand her fully. She is not without flaws. Her desire to maintain peace often leads her to bury conflicts rather than confront them, a tendency that has consequences she doesn't always foresee. Her moral compass is steady, but she is willing to compromise it in moments where protecting those she loves seems to outweigh the cost. Haiju's greatest weapon is her ability to read people's motives, yet even she can be blindsided by the depth of another's deception. Standing beside her, and sometimes in stark opposition, is her husband, Yoon Jae-hoon. He is the kind of man whose words are measured and deliberate, revealing just enough to maintain trust, but never quite enough to reveal his full hand. Jae-hoon's intelligence is clinical, precise. He sees patterns others miss, and his decisions are calculated for maximum advantage. He is a protector in his own way, but not always in the way Haiju needs him to be. His love for her exists, but it is restrained, disciplined, and sometimes overshadowed by his own ambitions. There is a part of him that operates in a moral gray zone, comfortable with bending the rules if the end justifies the means. His emotional restraint can make him seem cold, even when he is quietly consumed by the need to keep his family safe. His past choices and alliances reveal a man who understands the ugliness of the world and has learned to work within it rather than against it. Kim Haiju's daughter, Chae-yoon, is perhaps the purest character in intention, yet she is shaped by the subtle undercurrents of the adult world she inhabits. Bright, observant, and sensitive, She often picks up on tensions her parents believe they have hidden from her. There is a quiet maturity to her, the kind that children develop when they grow up around unspoken truths. Her trust in her mother is absolute, but her relationship with her father is more complicated. A mix of admiration, confusion, and unarticulated distance. Cha-Yoon's emotional core is one of empathy, yet she is beginning to understand that even love is not always enough to make people do the right thing. On the other side of the moral line, or at least what appears to be the other side, stands Woo-jae, a figure of magnetic charm whose presence always carries an undercurrent of danger. He is not a man easily understood. His words are often layered with double meanings, and his actions, though sometimes generous, carry motives that serve his own ends. Woo-jae's confidence is both alluring and disarming. He moves through the world as though he owns it, yet there are cracks in his composure when old wounds are pressed. His loyalty is fluid, determined by the shifting tides of self-preservation and personal vendettas. He thrives in chaos because he understands it and can manipulate it to his advantage. And yet, in rare, fleeting moments, there is a glimpse of vulnerability, suggesting that his cynicism is a defense rather than an innate cruelty. Kim Kyung-ho, though less present in every scene, plays an essential role in the dynamic web of relationships. His past binds him to the central characters in ways that are not always immediately visible. He carries the weight of decisions made long ago, decisions that ripple into the present. Kyung-ho is cautious, a man who has learned that survival often means staying in the shadows. But when pushed, his resolve is fierce, and his loyalty, once earned, is unshakable. He does not seek confrontation, but he is not afraid of it when it becomes unavoidable. His morality is more traditional than that of Jae-hoon or Woo-jae, yet even he is willing to make compromises if the stakes demand it. A different kind of complexity is embodied in Han Soo-jin, whose presence in the story is like a spark that can either ignite warmth or burn everything to ash. She is perceptive, ambitious, and unapologetically self-interested when it suits her, yet she is also capable of genuine care. Soo-jin is a survivor in every sense. She knows how to adapt, how to read people's weaknesses, and how to use her own vulnerability as a weapon when necessary. She understands that in the world she inhabits, truth is not an absolute but a currency, and she spends it sparingly. Her connections to multiple key players make her a pivotal figure, though she herself is often underestimated. Then there's Detective Yoon, whose dogged pursuit of truth is as much about personal redemption as it is about justice. Yoon has seen enough corruption to know that the truth rarely survives unscathed in the hands of power. He is methodical, unafraid to dig into places others would rather leave buried, and relentless once he has set his sights on a target. Yet his pursuit is not without personal cost. His sense of justice can sometimes blind him to the human consequences of exposing certain truths. There is a quiet sadness to him, the kind that comes from having fought too many battles where victory felt hollow. The supporting figures in this story, neighbors, acquaintances, colleagues, are not mere background. Each one serves as a reminder that the central conflict does not exist in isolation. Every interaction is a thread in a larger web of influence and perception. The tension in this world is maintained because everyone, in some way, is performing a role for the benefit of others, whether it's to maintain appearances, protect someone, or conceal their own missteps. The smallest choices ripple outward, affecting alliances, creating mistrust, or forcing people into corners where they must reveal who they truly are. What makes these characters compelling is not simply what they do, but why they do it. For some, survival is the ultimate goal, and morality is a luxury they cannot afford. For others, love, whether romantic, familial, or platonic, is a guiding principle, though even that love can lead to destructive choices. Loyalties shift not because they are fickle, but because they are constantly tested by circumstances that pit self-interest against shared bonds. The lines between villain and hero blur until they are almost meaningless. The same person can be both savior and betrayer, depending on whose perspective you see them from. In their quietest moments, each character reveals something of their truest self. Haiju's stolen glances toward her daughter, when she thinks no one is watching, show the depth of her fear that she cannot protect her forever. Jae-hoon's subtle tightening of his jaw, when Woo-jae's name comes up, reveals how much more he knows than he says. Woo-jae's fleeting hesitation before crossing a moral line hints at a conscience that he would rather deny. Sue Jean's rare moments of silence, when she is not performing for anyone, reveal a woman who has had to make peace with the fact that she cannot have everything she wants. And Detective Yoon's pauses before knocking on a door suggest a man who knows that the truth, once uncovered, cannot be undone. These are not archetypes. They are human beings caught in a tangle of choices, consequences, and emotions. Their world does not reward purity of heart. It rewards adaptability, foresight, and the ability to live with one's own decisions, no matter how dark they may be. Trust is fragile here, easily shattered, and once gone, it rarely returns in its original form. Every alliance is conditional. Every promise has an unspoken clause, and every act of kindness carries the possibility of hidden motives. And yet, despite the betrayals, the lies, and the compromises, there are moments, small, almost imperceptible, where genuine connection breaks through the cynicism. A look, a touch, a shared silence can mean more than 1,000 words in this world. It is in those fleeting instants that we see why these characters keep moving forward, even when the odds are against them, because somewhere in the deepest part of themselves, they still believe that there is something worth saving. Under the dim glow of a studio's work lamp, the story of the film's making hides as many oddities, accidents, and peculiar miracles as the narrative it tells on screen. In truth, the world behind a camera was as layered and unpredictable as the fictional one we see, full of strange coincidences, subtle improvisations, and details so unusual that they almost feel like hidden riddles left for the most attentive to discover. Some of these details are stitched into the fabric of the film itself. Others live in whispered anecdotes from crew members who still recall them with a mix of disbelief and fondness. Together, they form an eccentric parallel history to the movie's official plot, one that explains why certain moments feel so alive, so spontaneous, and so charged with authenticity. One of the earliest curiosities began during the location scouting phase, before a single frame was shot. The director had been adamant about finding a very specific kind of house for a central sequence, an old estate that seemed to be caught between grandeur and decay, full of long corridors, echoing rooms, and the subtle scent of something forgotten. After weeks of searching through listings, archives, and recommendations, the location manager stumbled upon a property that seemed perfect, but the owner, an elderly widow, refused to allow filming unless the crew agreed to leave one room completely untouched. No one was allowed to enter it, move its furniture, or even adjust the curtains. When asked why, she simply said, "That room remembers things better than the others." The crew laughed what they assumed was an odd superstition, but they complied. Throughout production, the room stayed locked, its secrets preserved, while filming unfolded all around it. Years later, members of the art department swore that in certain nighttime shots, you could see a faint glimmer of light coming from under its door, even though no electricity was connected there. The casting process carried its own streak of strangeness. One of the key supporting roles was filled almost by accident when the original actor dropped out due to scheduling conflicts just 2 days before shooting his first scene. The replacement was a relatively unknown performer who had only come to the audition hall to accompany a friend. Bored, he read a few lines when the casting assistant jokingly handed him the script, and his delivery left everyone stunned. He brought an unplanned edge to the role, a mixture of fragility and cunning, that not only altered how his scenes played, but even made the writers tweak later parts of the script to expand his presence. In retrospect, the director admitted that this last-minute stroke of fortune was one of the defining changes that made the second act more unpredictable. The weather became both a saboteur and a secret co-writer of the film. The script originally planned for a pivotal scene to take place in dry, clear conditions, crisp shadows, and steady sunlight. Instead, the day arrived under a shroud of heavy fog, rolling in from the hills like an invading army. The crew panicked, expecting delays and reshoots. But when the director saw the fog twisting through the trees and wrapping itself around the characters like a silent accomplice, he insisted they roll cameras immediately. The result was a haunting, dreamlike moment that ended up becoming one of the most memorable sequences in the entire film. Critics later praised the metaphorical visual poetry of the fog, never realizing it had been a complete accident, courtesy of a stubborn cold front that refused to lift. Perhaps the most peculiar stroke of luck, or fate, came from the props department. For one scene, the lead character was meant to open a drawer and find a small, insignificant trinket, a cheap plastic figurine the writers had added merely as a transitional beat. On the morning of shooting, the prop master realized the figurine had gone missing. Desperate, she rummaged through boxes of unrelated items until she found an old brass key with no matching lock. On a whim, she replaced the figurine with the key, assuming the change wouldn't matter. But the moment the actor picked it up, he improvised a subtle pause, staring at it as though it carried the weight of an entire backstory. This unscripted choice intrigued the director so much that the key quietly became a recurring motif, appearing in several later scenes. Fans have since developed elaborate theories about its symbolic meaning, completely unaware that it was nothing more than a last-minute substitution for a lost toy. Sound design, too, had its share of oddities. During a late-night editing session, the sound engineer was layering ambient noises for a quiet kitchen scene when an unplanned sound crept into the mix, a faint whisper that none of the crew had recorded. Thinking it was a glitch, they replayed the footage, only to hear the whisper again, this time more distinctly. Some claimed it sounded like a woman's voice saying, "Not yet." The engineer swore it must have been an audio bleed from another channel, but the director decided to keep it in, buried low enough in the mix that only the most attentive viewers would catch it. Years later, forums buzzed with speculation about the hidden ghost voice, with some insisting it tied into the film's deeper themes. Not all strangeness came from the supernatural or coincidental. Some of it was born from sheer eccentricity on the part of the crew. The costume designer, for instance, had a peculiar habit of lining the inside of the protagonist's jackets with patterns and colors that would never be seen on camera. When asked why, she explained that actors often perform better when they feel they're wearing something personal, even if no one else can see it. The lead actor later admitted that these invisible patterns made him feel as though his character had hidden secrets, influencing his posture and expressions in ways he couldn't quite explain. Another example of hidden detail came from the cinematographer, who developed a subtle visual rhythm for the film. Without announcing it to the rest of the crew, he adjusted the framing so that certain colors appeared more frequently in specific emotional contexts: deep reds in moments of moral tension, pale blues during scenes of doubt, muted greens in instances of quiet resilience. Most viewers never consciously noticed this, but many reported feeling a strange consistency in the film's tone, as though the mood was being guided by something they couldn't name. This was deliberate sorcery, woven into the film through nothing more than careful color placement. The shooting schedule itself was full of odd challenges. For one night scene, the crew needed the streets of a small town to be completely empty. They had permission from local authorities to block traffic, but just before rolling cameras, an old, dented bicycle appeared in the frame, being ridden slowly by a man wearing a raincoat and a crooked hat. No one recognized him as part of the crew. The assistant director yelled for him to stop, but the man pedaled away into the darkness, leaving the team baffled. Later, when reviewing the footage, they realized the man's brief appearance, only a silhouette against dim streetlights, added an eerie, almost surreal quality to the scene. The director decided to keep it, calling it a gift from the unknown. One of the strangest behind-the-scenes events involved a piece of music. The composer had written a score for a climactic scene, but felt dissatisfied with how it sat against the images. Late one night, as he was tinkering with melodies, the power in the studio briefly went out. When it came back, the synthesizer had reset to a default setting, producing a tone the composer had never used before. Intrigued, he began playing with it, and within hours he had composed an entirely new piece, minimalist, haunting, and unlike anything else in film. That accidental piece became the signature theme, the one audiences later associated most closely with the film's emotional core. Even in the editing room, the movie's fate was shaped by chance. A crucial flashback sequence was originally twice as long, but when a reel of footage was accidentally mislabeled and misplaced, the editor was forced to cut around the missing shots. The result was a fragmented, elliptical flashback that left certain questions unanswered, giving the film a lingering sense of mystery. Viewers praised its bold, ambiguous storytelling, never suspecting it had been born from a simple organizational error. Then there were the small, almost invisible bits of trivia that only the crew knew. The director's cameo as a background pedestrian, the fact that one of the most emotional monologues was shot on the actor's actual birthday, The running joke among the grips about a stubborn light stand that kept collapsing during takes, earning it the nickname the Traitor. Even the film's poster contained an oddity. The faint outline of an object in the background that wasn't actually in the film but had appeared in an early concept sketch, accidentally carried over to the final artwork. Through all these strange and unpredictable occurrences, the film gained a texture that no amount of deliberate planning could have created. Every unplanned key, mysterious whisper, misplaced reel, and serendipitous weather shift layered the finished work with authenticity and intrigue. It's why the movie, despite being a carefully crafted piece of cinema, still feels alive, full of accidents that somehow knew exactly where they were going. These oddities remind us that behind every seamless story on screen is a messier, stranger story off screen, one that often shapes the final product as much as the script, the actors, or the director's vision. And perhaps that's the strangest fact of all, the realization that sometimes the accidents aren't accidents at all, but the film telling its own story, whether anyone intended it or not. The story of this film unfolds not just in progression of its scenes, but in the way each significant event seems to reverberate through the audience, creating ripples that linger long after the credits roll. To look at these events through a critical lens is to see them not merely as narrative checkpoints, but as the vital arteries through which the film's emotional and thematic lifeblood flows. The most impactful moments in the story are built with the precision of craftsmen, layered with subtext, symbolic meaning, and an emotional core that allows each to stand on its own as a mini-story, yet contribute to the larger journey of the film, from the very first key incident to the last. The events are interconnected in a way that shapes the film's ultimate reception and its resonance in the hearts of viewers. It begins with the opening act's pivotal turning point, a moment so carefully choreographed that it feels at once spontaneous and inevitable. In the narrative, it might appear to be an inciting incident, the kind every story needs, but beneath its surface lies an undercurrent of tension that sets the tone for everything that follows. The camera does not simply record this scene, it interrogates it. The framing is deliberately claustrophobic, suggesting both the constraints of protagonist's situation and the oppressive social order around them. Critics noted how this sequence avoided the heavy-handed exposition typical of many opening acts. Instead, the filmmakers trusted the audience to sense the unease without being told. That creative choice established a foundation of mutual respect between storyteller and viewer, a relationship that made the later emotional payoffs feel earned rather than forced. The next major event, a confrontation that shatters the fragile equilibrium of the story, has often been praised for its emotional complexity. It is not just a clash of characters, but a collision of worldviews. From a technical standpoint, the scene is remarkable for how it uses silence as a weapon. The pauses between lines are not empty. They are loaded with meaning. Viewers are left to fill in the blanks. And in doing so, they become active participants in the storytelling. This is part of the film's genius. It draws the audience into complicity, making them feel the moral ambiguity of the characters' actions. In reviews, this moment was often cited as the film's emotional hook, the point where even skeptical viewers found themselves fully invested. Thematically, it serves as the first deep excavation of the story's core ideas, probing questions about loyalty, power, and the cost of integrity. Then there is the midpoint event, a seemingly small but thematically seismic shift in the protagonist's journey. Structurally, this is where many films falter, padding the runtime with filler until the climax. Here, however, the midpoint is a revelation that reorients the entire story. What seemed like a straightforward trajectory suddenly splinters into a labyrinth of moral choices. The revelation is not about a hidden villain or a secret past. It is about perception, the realization that the narrative we've been watching is itself a kind of illusion, shaped by biases and half-truths. From a critical standpoint, this is where the film most clearly asserts its thematic ambition. It refuses to comfort the audience with clear moral binaries, forcing them to confront their own interpretive instincts. The film critics who championed it often pointed to the structural daring as one of the reasons it lingered in the cultural conversation long after release. As the story pushes toward its climax, another crucial event unfolds, one that is not just plot-driven but emotionally devastating. It is the breaking point both for the protagonist and for the thematic architecture of the film. The sequence is notable for how it weaponizes the audience's expectations. Everything leading up to it has primed viewers for a triumphant reversal, a restoration of order. Instead, the film delivers something far more unsettling, a victory so compromised that it feels almost like a defeat. This subversion forces the audience to question the nature of justice and whether moral purity is even possible in the world the film has created. The reception to this choice was polarized. Some critics hailed it as a bold rejection of formula, while others felt betrayed, as if the film had broken an unspoken contract with its audience. But even detractors had to admit that the event gave the film a kind of thematic heft that more conventional storytelling could not achieve. The final act contained perhaps the most discussed scene in the entire film, a quiet, almost anticlimactic moment that serves as an emotional epilogue. There are no grand speeches, no sweeping musical swells. Instead, the protagonist is left alone, framed against an environment that feels both familiar and alien after the journey we've taken. This moment is where the film's emotional resonance crystallizes. It is not about closure, it is about reckoning. The choice to end on this note, instead of a definitive resolution, is what elevates the film from a well-crafted narrative to a work of lasting significance. Critics have compared this ending to the final brushstroke of a painting, one that does not complete the picture so much as it invites the viewer to imagine the space beyond the frame. From a broader perspective, the film's impact and reception were shaped by how these events spoke to the zeitgeist of its time. Upon release, audiences were navigating their own uncertainties, disillusionments, and moral compromises. The film's refusal to offer easy answers mirrored that cultural mood, and as a result, it became a touchstone for conversations about personal integrity, societal corruption, and the fragile nature of truth. Its events were not just fictional constructs. They were metaphors that resonated with real-world experiences. Emotionally, the resonance of the film lies in its balance between intimacy and universality. The events are deeply personal to the characters, yet they echo patterns of human behavior that are instantly recognizable. The confrontation scenes capture the universal sting of betrayal. The midpoint revelation mirrors the jolt of realizing you've been wrong about someone you trusted. The final quiet scene taps into the loneliness that comes from knowing there is no going back the way things were. Each event is an emotional chord, and together they form a melody that stays with the audience. Critically, the film has been dissected for how it manipulates structure to enhance emotional impact. Scholars have noted that its use of narrative rhythm, alternating moments of high tension with quieter, introspective beats, prevents emotional fatigue and keeps the audience engaged on multiple levels. The way these events are spaced allows the viewer time to process and reflect, making the climactic moments hit harder when they arrive. Even years later, discussions about the film often return to the same key events, replayed and reinterpreted in light of changing cultural contexts. Some see the protagonist's final choice as an act of defiance. Others see it as surrender. The ambiguity is not a flaw but a feature, a deliberate choice that ensures the film's relevance endures. By crafting events that are open to multiple readings, the filmmakers created a work that could grow alongside its audience. The thematic resonance, then, is not just in the content of these events, but in their construction. Every choice, in framing, pacing, dialogue, and even silence, serves the dual purpose of advancing the plot and deepening the thematic inquiry. The events do not merely happen. They are sculpted to provoke, unsettle, and linger. That is why, when critics speak of the film's legacy, they often frame it not as a story that was told, but as an experience that was shared, one that each viewer carries away in a slightly different form, shaped by their own perspectives, biases, and emotional truths. If anything, the enduring lesson of this film is that significant events in a narrative are not measured solely by their shock value or plot function. They are defined by the questions they leave unanswered, the emotions they stir without resolving, and the space they create for viewers to insert themselves into the story. It is in that space, between what is shown and what is felt, that the film's true power lies, ensuring that its impact will be felt for years to come. The production began on a crisp autumn morning, long before the public even knew that such a film was being made. The studio lot was still bathed in early mist when the first trucks rolled in, carrying crates of lights, coil cables, camera rigs, and half-built set pieces wrapped in protective tarps. Most films begin with a script reading or a table session, but here the journey had started weeks earlier, when production designers sat with the director in a cramped, coffee-stained office, sketching the earliest visions of the world they wanted to create. Those drawings, at first little more than rough pencil lines, had since evolved into elaborate blueprints and 3D renderings, each one marked by dozens of small sticky notes. Tiny bursts of creative debate frozen in paper form. When the cast arrived for their first day on set, the place was unrecognizable from the empty warehouse it had once been. The crew had transformed into a bustling microcosm of the film's universe. Intricate props stacked in corners, walls painted in colors that would barely register consciously to the audience but would subtly guide their emotions, and camera cranes resting like sleeping beasts, waiting to be roused. Even the smell of fresh paint lingered, mingling with the aroma of strong coffee that wafted from the catering tent just outside. The director, known for a quiet, almost meditative demeanor, moved through the space without calling much attention to himself, touching the edges of set pieces, adjusting the placement of the chair, nodding silently at the lighting gaffer when he approved a shadow's angle. From the very beginning, the film's production carried an almost obsessive attention to detail. Every object on set, from the most prominent prop to the smallest background element, had a story behind it. The prop master once spent 3 days searching through antique markets for a specific kind of brass key, not because it was essential to plot, but because the director felt it would add authenticity to a brief moment in the background. There were whispered jokes among the crew about this fixation. How even if the audience never noticed, the director would know, and that was enough. "It's not about being seen," he once told a grip. "It's about being felt." The filming process was a strange blend of precision and chaos. On any given day, dozens of moving parts had to align perfectly. The right light at the right time, the right expression from the actors, the right amount of steam from a teacup in the foreground. Yet somehow, amidst this logistical puzzle, there was room for spontaneity. One afternoon, during what was meant to be a quiet dialogue scene, an unplanned gust of wind swept through the open set doors, scattering papers across the floor. Most directors would have called cut, but here the moment was seized. The actors improvised, weaving the wind into their exchange, and the result was so natural, so alive, that it made the final cut. Later, a sound mixer would confess that the scene's ambient audio had been a nightmare to clean up, but it was worth it. Between takes, the set was a different world altogether. The tension of filming gave way to camaraderie, to little pockets of laughter and storytelling. The costume department huddled over racks of clothing, meticulously steaming out wrinkles while trading recipes and weekend plans. The camera operators compared lenses like car enthusiasts comparing engines, occasionally breaking into debates about which brand offered the truest color. The actors, freed from the weight of their characters for a few minutes, lounged in folding chairs, sipping tea or scrolling through their phones. Sometimes they practiced lines under their breath. Other times they'd launch into ridiculous impressions, sending the sound crew into silent fits of laughter behind their monitors. One of the most enduring legends from the shoot came from an evening when the crew had been working for 14 hours straight. Everyone was exhausted, tempers frayed, patience worn thin. They were filming a complex tracking shot that involved weaving a camera through a maze of moving extras, timed lighting changes, and a precisely choreographed bit of action. Take after take, something would go wrong. A background actor would miss their cue, a light would flare in the wrong place, the focus pull would slip by an inch. Finally, on what was supposed to be the last attempt before calling it a night, the camera operator tripped over a cable and sent the entire rig clattering to the floor. There was a stunned silence. Then, unexpectedly, the director began to laugh. Not a restrained chuckle, but a full, contagious laugh that spread to the entire crew until even the most frustrated grips were doubled over. They reset, shot the scene one more time, and nailed it perfectly. That final take became one of the most celebrated moments in the dailies. The film's visual style was a result of intense collaboration between the director and the cinematographer. They spent weeks experimenting with lenses, color palettes, and lighting setups before shooting even began. At one point, they tested over a dozen different light bulbs to find the one with the exact warmth they wanted for a single interior scene. The cinematographer believed that the color temperature of light could influence the audience's subconscious perception of a character's emotional state, and he was determined to make every frame count. This level of detail extended to camera movement as well. Sometimes the choice to move the camera half a step closer or to tilt it slightly off-center was a deliberate storytelling decision, not just a matter of framing. Sound design also played a crucial role in shaping the film's atmosphere. The sound team often recorded audio from unexpected sources, layering in noises that would never be guessed by the audience. The creak of an old leather chair in one scene was actually created by twisting a bundle of wet rope. The eerie background hum in a tense sequence came from slowing down the sound of a malfunctioning refrigerator. Even silence was treated as a tool. The director often spoke about the weight of quiet, using moments without sound to make the audience lean in, to force them to notice the smallest visual cues. The editing process was where the film truly took shape. Hours upon hours of footage were whittled down, reshaped, and reimagined in a dark room, lit only by the glow of computer screens. Sometimes entire subplots vanished in the editing bay, victims of pacing or tonal balance. The editor, a veteran of the industry, described the process as sculpting from marble. You start with this massive block of possibility, and you chip away until the story emerges. In a few cases, scenes were restructured so dramatically in post-production that even the actors didn't recognize them when they saw the final cut. A conversation that had originally taken place in a sunlit garden might be reassembled from different angles and lines of dialogue to appear as if it were happening indoors, under dim lamplight. The illusion was seamless, and it spoke to the almost alchemical power of editing. Not all the memorable moments happen on set. During location shooting in a remote area, the crew faced a sudden snowstorm that trapped them in their lodgings for nearly 2 days. Instead of halting work entirely, they used the time to plan out upcoming scenes in more detail, improvising rehearsal spaces in the hotel lobby. One actor even used the downtime to teach a small group of crew members how to play a traditional card game from his hometown, a pastime that became a nightly ritual for the rest of the shoot. By the time the storm cleared, they had developed a rhythm and camaraderie that carried through the rest of production. There were also small acts of kindness that never made headlines but were remembered by everyone involved. A lighting assistant once noticed that one of the extras had been standing in an unheated corridor between takes, shivering in their costume. Without a word, he handed over his own jacket and returned to his work in just a sweater, refusing to take it back until the scene was finished. The makeup department kept a stash of hand warmers for the same reason, slipping them discreetly into actors' pockets before outdoor scenes in cold weather. These gestures, though invisible to the audience, were part of what made the set feel like a community rather than just a workplace. The crew also had their share of running jokes and traditions. On Fridays, someone from the art department would sneak a small, barely noticeable prop into the background of a scene, a rubber duck on a bookshelf, a tiny toy soldier on a windowsill. These Friday Easter eggs were never meant to be noticed by the audience, but they became a morale booster for the team, who took delight in spotting them during playback. Once, the director himself joined in, slipping an old postcard from his hometown into the corner of a desk scene. Nobody noticed until weeks later, during the edit, when the sharp-eyed continuity supervisor pointed it out. By the time production wrapped, the set had taken on the bittersweet feeling of a place that was about to disappear forever. The walls that had felt so solid were, after all, just painted wood. The windows led to nothing. The bustling streets were only a few meters long before ending in scaffolding. Crew members lingered during the final teardown, taking photos, pocketing small mementos, and saying quiet goodbyes. For the director, it was the end of a long journey that had begun in that coffee-stained office months ago. For the crew, it was the end of a shared world they had built together, frame by frame, laugh by laugh, and problem by problem. And yet, the real magic of production was that, once the film was released, this temporary world became immortal. The audience would never know about the gust of wind, the hidden toy soldier, the snowstorm card games, or the painstaking search for a brass key. They would only see the finished story, seamless and alive, unaware of the thousands of decisions, accidents, and acts of care that had brought it into being. But for those who had been there, those details would always be part of the film, not just in its images, but in the memories of the people who made them happen. From the very first frame, the film's world unfolds like a carefully crafted tapestry, woven with colors, textures, and light that draw the audience into a place that feels at once foreign and deeply familiar. The setting is not merely a backdrop. It breathes and shifts like a living character, influencing the rhythm of the story and the emotions of the people within it. Streets bustle with unspoken histories. The air hangs heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth or the faint tang of sea salt, and every location seems to hold its own memory, its own pulse. The director's choice of settings feels intentional in every sense, as though each space was selected to mirror a hidden truth about the characters who inhabit it. The city at the film's heart is shown neither as a polished tourist postcard nor as a grim dystopia. It is something in between, something real. There are narrow alleyways where faded murals whisper forgotten political slogans, and markets where the chatter of vendors mingles with the clinking of coins. The audience is guided through these spaces not with sweeping establishing shots alone, but with intimate glimpses. A child's chalk drawing on a cracked wall, a drop of condensation sliding down a glass in a crowded cafe, the rusted gate of a courtyard swinging slightly in the breeze. These details anchor the film's emotional realism, making the viewer feel not just like an observer, but like a temporary resident. Cinematography plays a central role in how these spaces come alive. Light is wielded like language here, sometimes sharp and cutting, at other times soft and forgiving. The early morning scenes glow in amber tones, suggesting possibility, while moments of tension are often bathed in cold, blue shadows that seem to drain the warmth from a frame. The choice of lenses shifts subtly depending on the emotional state of the characters. Wide-angle shots stretch the space, making individuals seem small and vulnerable within it, while tight close-ups collapse the world around them, trapping them in their own emotional confines. This deliberate manipulation of visual space creates an almost subconscious alignment between the viewer's feelings and the characters' journeys. The sound design and visual framing often work in tandem to make the setting feel like a silent narrator. In one memorable sequence, the camera follows a character down a rain-slicked street. The reflections in the puddles double the world, creating an upside-down mirror city that seems to blur the lines between reality and memory. The patter of raindrops becomes a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that carries the scene forward. Such sequences make the setting feel less like a stage and more like an active participant in the story's unfolding. One of the film's most powerful uses of setting comes during a pivotal emotional turning point, when the main character retreats to an isolated coastal village. The shift from the dense urban sprawl to the open expanse of sea and sky is striking, almost jarring, as though the air itself has been cleared of the tension that once hung in it. The horizon line dominates the frame, an endless stretch that seems to promise both freedom and the terrifying unknown. Here, the sound of crashing waves replaces the city's constant hum, and the color palette opens up, replacing shadow-heavy interiors with the bright yet blinding clarity of daylight. The cinematography in these scenes uses longer takes, allowing the environment's natural rhythms, wind moving through grass, the slow tilt of sun, to dictate the pace. This contrast deepens the sense that the setting is inextricably tied to the protagonist's emotional state. Even interiors are treated with the same meticulous attention. A dimly lit apartment with peeling wallpaper might tell us more about a character's inner life than any dialogue could. The placement of objects in a room, the way a teacup is chipped, the books left haphazardly on a shelf, the curtain that never quite closes all the way, becomes a form of visual storytelling. These choices aren't incidental. They are as deliberate as any line of script, reinforcing the mood without drawing overt attention to themselves. The film also plays with seasonal shifts, using them as a visual and thematic device. Early scenes unfold in late summer, when the air is thick and colors are saturated. As the story progresses, autumn creeps in, with its muted golds and deep reds, suggesting change and decay. By the time winter arrives, the palette has drained almost entirely, mirroring the narrative's emotional austerity. Snow muffles the city's noise, adding an eerie stillness to moments of reflection, while the occasional burst of color, a scarf, a streetlight, a painted door, becomes more striking against the monochrome surroundings. Perhaps most impressive is the way the camera's movement interacts with these environments. In moments of uncertainty or chaos, it might drift handheld, giving a sensation of instability. In moments of clarity, it steadies, framing the world with symmetry and calm. Sometimes the camera lingers longer than expected, forcing the audience to sit with an image, an empty chair by a window, a forgotten playground at dusk, until the emotional weight becomes undeniable. This willingness to let the setting speak, without rushing to the next plot beat, allows the film to breathe in a way that feels rare. The atmospheric cohesion is further strengthened by the use of natural elements. Water, for instance, recurs throughout the film, sometimes as rain, sometimes as a glass of water on a bedside table, sometimes as the ocean itself. It reflects light, distorts images, and carries its own symbolic resonance, suggesting change, cleansing, or the inevitability of time's flow. Similarly, light filtering through leaves, the dust motes in a sunbeam, or the flicker of neon against wet pavement all work together to make the film's world tactile and alive. All these visual choices feed into the emotional texture of the story. The audience doesn't simply learn about the characters' struggles. They feel them through the weight of the air in a room, the tightness of a narrow hallway, the oppressive glare of the midday sun. The film understands that human emotion is inseparable from physical environment, and it uses that understanding to weave a story that lingers in the senses long after credits roll. By the time the final scene fades to black, the viewer has not just followed a plot, but inhabited a place. They've walked its streets, sat in its dimly lit rooms, felt the wind on its coasts, and watched its seasons turn. The settings have imprinted themselves as vividly as any character, leaving behind a resonance that is as much about place as it is about people. In that way, the film's mastery lies not only in the story it tells, but in the world it creates, a world so complete and compelling that stepping out of the theater feels like waking from a vivid dream, with the lingering sense that somewhere, just beyond reach, that city still hums, those waves still break, and those quiet rooms still wait in the half-light. The set was alive before the cameras ever rolled. In the early mornings, when the light was still silver and the dew clung stubbornly to grass, you could hear the low murmur of voices in the distance. Crew members hauling cables, setting up lights, running quiet tests. The smell of fresh coffee would drift through the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of film equipment that had been sitting out overnight. The actors, still wrapped in hoodies or jackets, would wander in one by one, greeting the makeup artists like old friends. There was always a feeling that the day was just on the edge of becoming something extraordinary. But of course, film magic rarely happens without its shared chaos. There were days when the weather itself seemed to have signed up as a cast member, offering sudden gusts of wind, unexpected showers, or, in one infamous case, a blinding heat wave that made the costume stick to the actor's skin. The director, unflappable as ever, treated each inconvenience like a puzzle to be solved. On one sweltering afternoon, the crew had to film a pivotal emotional scene under a glaring sun. Everyone was concerned that the actors would look too hot, sweat pooling on their brows, but the cinematographer found an angle that turned the harsh sunlight into a halo-like glow. What could have been a continuity nightmare became one of the film's most visually poetic shots. The camaraderie among the cast and crew didn't develop overnight. It grew out of small, repeated acts of kindness, shared jokes, and the recognition that everyone was working toward the same vision. There was the sound technician who, without a word, would always have an extra bottle of cold water ready for the lead actor after a physically demanding scene. Or the set designer who once stayed until midnight repainting a wall because the director suddenly realized color didn't match the mood he wanted. And of course, there was the ongoing prank war between two of the supporting actors, a battle of harmless sabotage that ranged from swapping each other's script pages to hiding tiny rubber ducks in hard-to-find places on set. By the time the shoot wrapped, no one knew how many ducks there were, or where they all had ended up. Some of the most surprising moments happened when things went wrong. One day, during the filming of a tense sequence that required precise timing, a prop door refused to open. The actor, fully immersed in character, didn't break stride. He slammed his shoulder into the door and delivered his lines as if the obstacle had been scripted. The crew watched, half in awe and half in disbelief, as the take played out perfectly. When the director yelled cut, the entire set burst into applause. That take ended up in the final cut of the film, a small testament to the idea that imperfection can be the birthplace of brilliance. There was also the matter of the night shoot, which everyone both dreaded and looked forward to. The scene called for a remote location, lit only by the moon and carefully arranged lanterns. Getting there required a long drive over winding roads, followed by a short hike carrying heavy equipment. The isolation created a strange sense of intimacy. Actors rehearsed under the stars while the crew whispered and adjusted lights. At one point, the generator failed, plunging the entire set into darkness. Instead of panicking, the director asked everyone to pause, listen to the silence, and take in the night. That pause became a kind of reset button for the team's energy. When the lights came back on, there was a renewed focus that carried them through until dawn. Sometimes the challenges were less about the environment and more about the nature of the scene itself. Emotional sequences were the most draining. One actress recalled a day when she had to deliver a long monologue that left her feeling raw and exposed. Between takes, she sat in a quiet corner, sipping tea, while the rest of the crew gave her space. After the final take, the boom operator, who had been listening intently all along, approached and simply said, "That was beautiful." It was a small comment, but it meant the world to her. Even the rehearsals had their share of unpredictability. In one rehearsal for a dinner scene, an extra accidentally dropped a plate. The shattering sound startled everyone, but the lead actor stayed in character. Improvising a line that acknowledged the accident in a way that was so natural, the director decided to recreate it in the actual shoot. That moment became one of those subtle touches audiences would later assume was carefully planned. Of course, there were lighter moments too, the ones that made the long hours bearable. Like the day a delivery van got lost and ended up in the middle of a take, the driver staring wide-eyed as he realized he'd wandered into a movie set. Or the time the wardrobe department had to sew a costume back together on the actor while they were still wearing it, because there wasn't enough time to change before the next shot. These were the kinds of stories that would be told and retold at wrap parties and reunion dinners. The little legends that become part of a film's DNA. Some friendships from the set endured long after filming ended. Bonds were forged in the shared strain of early call times, unpredictable weather, and the pressure of getting it right before the light faded. People who had started as strangers left feeling like they'd been through a small lifetime together. The cinematographer once joked that making a film was like going to war, except with better catering and more dramatic costumes. And there was a final week, when everyone knew the end was near. There was a bittersweet undercurrent to everything. The jokes landed softer, the conversations lingered longer. People started taking more behind-the-scenes photos, capturing not just elaborate sets and camera rigs, but also the quieter moments. Someone curled up in a chair reading lines, two crew members laughing over coffee, the director sitting alone for a moment, staring at the monitor with a faint, tired smile. When the very last shot was done, there was a beat of silence, as if no one was sure it was really over. Then came the applause, the hugs, the cheers. People started packing up, but slowly, reluctantly, as though leaving too quickly would break the spell. Someone popped open a bottle of champagne. The prank war came to a ceremonial close when one of the actors presented the other with a small box containing the last hidden rubber duck. Those understood more ducks would continue to appear in the years to come. In the end, what stayed with everyone wasn't just the film itself, but the knowledge of what it took to bring it to life. The days when nothing seemed to go right. The nights when the world felt impossibly large and yet contained within a circle of light from a single lantern. The small gestures of care and the bursts of laughter in between takes. These were the moments that lived on. The film would be seen by thousands, maybe millions, but only this small group would ever truly know the sound of cables being uncoiled at dawn, the way the set smelled after a sudden rain, or the feeling of being part of something that existed for a short, brilliant time before vanishing into memory. And that is the real magic of filmmaking. The story the audience sees is only half the story. The other half is made of dust, sweat, coffee, whispered instructions, stubborn doors, lost delivery vans, midnight lanterns, and the kind of camaraderie that can only be born under the strange, demanding, wonderful spell of a film set. Under the surface of its twisting plot and complex characters, the film breathes with a quiet pulse of ideas, those hidden currents that run deeper than dialogue or even plot points, guiding the viewer's emotional and intellectual journey without ever announcing themselves outright. It begins subtly, like the faint echo of something half-remembered, embedded in the very first images, a world divided by invisible lines, where beauty and decay share the same frame, and where every shadow seems to whisper something just beyond our grasp. At its heart, the film wrestles with the tension between control and surrender. The protagonist's journey is shaped by the constant push and pull between trying to impose order on a chaotic world and learning to accept that some forces cannot be mastered, only understood. Early scenes place them in meticulously structured spaces, rooms that feel almost too neat, cities mapped with precision, before gradually dismantling that structure as events unfold. It's a theme that resonates beyond the plot, touching on the human impulse to shield ourselves with routines, rules, and certainties, only to find that real growth often comes when those certainties collapse. Threaded through this is a second, quieter theme, the fragility of identity. The film never lectures about it, but every character carries traces of masks they've worn for so long they've almost forgotten what's beneath. The way a hand lingers on a photograph, the slight hesitation before answering a question, the glance toward a mirror that's not quite met. These moments accumulate, revealing how much of ourselves are constructed for others and how dangerous it can be when those constructions start to crack. The director weaves these ideas into the visual language of the film with a craftsman's precision. Take, for example, the recurring motif of reflections, mirrors, windows, pools of water. They appear almost incidentally, yet each time they carry a slightly different weight. In one scene, a reflection is crisp and clear, perfectly aligned with reality. In another, it's fractured, distorted, barely holding the image together. By the time the story reaches its climax, a final reflection, imperfect but unbroken, feels like a quiet resolution, an acknowledgement that identity need not be flawless to be whole. Nature, too, plays a symbolic role, often standing in contrast to the carefully constructed urban spaces the characters inhabit. A solitary tree in an otherwise barren field becomes a silent witness to one of the protagonist's most vulnerable moments. A sudden downpour washes away the dust from streets and faces alike, blurring boundaries between characters who were once sharply divided. Even the recurring presence of birds, sometimes in graceful flight, sometimes caged, underscores the film's central questions about freedom, confinement, and what it means to truly escape. The interplay between light and shadow is perhaps the most potent symbolic tool the film employs. Early on, light is often harsh, clinical, leaving no place for secrets. As the protagonist's journey deepens, the lighting shifts, shadows lengthen, corners darken, and the frame begins to hold spaces the eye cannot fully penetrate. This shift mirrors the character's growing awareness that truth is rarely found in full illumination. Often, it hides in half-light, in what is only partially revealed. The cinematographer plays with this duality, allowing scenes to feel both intimate and uncertain, as if the audience is being invited not just to watch, but to search. The film's use of color is no less deliberate. Early sequences are bathed in muted, almost washed-out tones, reflecting a life drained of spontaneity and passion. But as the story progresses, small bursts of color begin to punctuate the frame. A red scarf against a gray street, the vivid green of new leaves glimpsed through a window. These moments of color are never random. They often coincide with shifts in the characters' emotional states, marking points where they begin to reclaim pieces of themselves they thought were lost. By the end, the palette has deepened, not into garish brightness, but into a richness that suggests both hard-won peace and lingering scars. Beneath all these layers lies a meditation on memory and its unreliability. The narrative structure itself, with its flashbacks and fractured chronology, mirrors the way memory works, messy, selective, and sometimes untrustworthy. Certain objects reappear across timelines, a watch, a letter, a childhood drawing. These items take on shifting meanings depending on when and how they are seen, echoing the way our own memories are colored by present emotions and past wounds. It's not just the characters who are asked to question what they remember. The audience, too, begins to doubt the neatness of their own interpretations. The symbolism is not confined to objects and visuals. It seeps into the very fabric of the dialogue. Phrases are repeated in different contexts, their meanings altered by time and perspective. A sentence spoken in anger early on reappears later in a moment of tenderness, transformed not by the words themselves but by the journey taken between them. This repetition acts almost like a refrain in a piece of music, grounding the viewer while also inviting them to hear the same notes in a new way. Even silence carries thematic weight. Some of the most pivotal moments in the film occur without a single word being spoken, just a lingering look, the shift of breath, the sound of something faint in the distance. These silences are not empty. They are charged, allowing the audience to step into the spaces the characters cannot fill with language. In doing so, the film reminds us that not all truths can be articulated, and not all resolutions are spoken aloud. The ultimate power of these themes lies in their integration. The film never treats them as separate threads to be tied off neatly. Instead, they weave in and out of one another, like strands in a tapestry whose pattern only becomes clear when viewed from a distance. The struggle for control feeds into questions of identity, which in turn are shaped by the unreliability of memory. Symbolism doesn't sit on the surface of the viewer to spot and check off. It seeps into the experience, shaping the way the story feels as much as the way it unfolds. By the time the credits roll, the audience may not have a simple moral to carry away, but they are left with something perhaps more valuable, an emotional afterimage, a lingering sense of having been drawn into a world where every image, every sound, every pause carried the weight of meaning. In this way, the film's themes and symbolism do what the best cinema always does. They stay with you, quietly reshaping the way you see not just the story, but the world beyond it. When the lights dim and the screen begins to glow, the return to Burke and How to Train Your Dragon 2025 doesn't feel like a simple sequel. It feels like a homecoming wrapped in cinematic craftsmanship. The film carries a heartbeat of its predecessors, yet breathes with more mature rhythm, born of years of animation advancements, live-action sensibilities, and a studio that clearly decided to treat this chapter not just as a continuation, but as a visual and auditory event. The filmmaking here is not loud about itself. It's woven into every moment, every frame, so that you don't just watch the story, you inhabit it. From a very first shot, the film's technique announces itself with a confidence that doesn't need to shout. Instead of beginning with a sweeping, show-offy flyover of Burke, it starts low and intimate, close on the frost of a dragon's breath, the delicate crystals refracting light as the camera's focus shifts to a young rider adjusting the saddle straps. The choice is deliberate. It's an opening that places the viewer physically close to the world, allowing textures and micro details to anchor you in reality. In traditional animation, there is often a distance between the viewer and the environment, a softness in the edges. Here, the camera behaves more like in live action, with shallow depth of field, subtle focus pulls, and natural light diffusion, making you believe that if you reached out, your fingers might graze the worn leather or the coarse dragon scales. The filmmakers leaned heavily into hybrid cinematography, blending computer-generated dragons and environments with lighting schemes and lens simulations that mimic real-world optics. The virtual cinematography department even consulted with live-action directors of photography to create camera imperfections. Slight lens flares when light catches the frame, micro-jitters when the shot is handheld, and breathing in the focus that gives a subconscious sense of human operation behind the lens. This choice matters more than it might seem. It bridges the gap between fantasy and tangible reality. Atmosphere is the word that quietly governs a film. The filmmakers shape it not just with visuals, but with the rhythm of shots, the breathing space between edits, and the orchestration of sound. Early scenes are patient. They linger a heartbeat longer than expected, allowing us to drink in the mist curling off the sea or the slow flicker of torchlight inside a Viking hall. That patience tells us something. This is a world worth exploring, not rushing through. When the action does come, the editing shifts gear. Cuts become quicker. Frames are sometimes trimmed to the barest motion, and the camera will whip pan to keep pace with the dragon's speed. The alternation between slow immersion and high-velocity energy is what makes the atmosphere dynamic. Sound, in this world, is not merely a supporting player. It's a character. The sound design team reportedly recorded everything from falcon wing beats to the groan of old sailing ropes in order to layer authentic textures into dragon flight. A passing shot of Toothless gliding overhead carries not just a generic whoosh, but the nuanced rush of air bending around his wings, the faint flexing creak of membranes under strain, and even the low, resonant thrum of his body cutting through clouds. Dialogue never has a fight for space because the mixing respects the natural layering of sound. When riders shout mid-flight, the wind partially swallows their words, making you lean forward instinctively, as if you were in that saddle with them. Editing choices are deeply tied to emotion. When Hiccup makes a significant decision or faces a moment of loss, the cuts slow down, but more importantly, the transitions become softer, dissolves, long crossfades. Even match cuts that link two moments in time by sheer motion or composition. In one standout scene, Hiccup stands in the training ring watching a young dragon lift off for the first time. The edit cuts to a memory of Toothless doing the same years before. The shot composition mirrors perfectly, so the transition feels less like a cut and more like a ghost of the past slipping into the present. It's not just efficient storytelling. It's editing as emotional architecture. Lighting plays a critical role in tone. The film avoids the temptation of overbright digital gloss. Instead, shadows have weight. Torchlight flickers unevenly, moonlight is silver and cold, and interiors are warm but not blinding. Scenes at sea are sometimes lit only by the reflection of the water itself, giving skin and scale a moving, dappled texture. These choices don't just look pretty. They tell the audience subconsciously what kind of world this is, a place where nature is dominant, where beauty comes with an edge of danger, and where human life exists in relationship with its environment rather than dominating it. Camera movement is perhaps the single greatest source of immersion here. The directors resisted locking perspective into purely animated, impossible shots. Instead, they let the camera feel grounded in physics. When a dragon dives, the camera follows a fraction late, just as a real drone operator might be slightly behind the motion. During intimate conversations, the camera often moves in slow, almost imperceptible pushes, creating the sensation of leaning in. The filmmakers also employ a technique reminiscent of IMAX nature documentaries during certain flight sequences. Long, unbroken takes that allow the environment to speak for itself, as dragons weave through cloud banks or skim the ocean surface. Perhaps the most striking filmmaking choice is the way the movie handles scale. In scenes with dragons and humans, the camera sometimes stays at human eye level, making dragons loom impossibly large, forcing us to crane our necks mentally. At other times, especially in moments of connection between rider and dragon, the frame will settle into a shared middle ground, equalizing them in size and emotional weight. This subtle manipulation of perspective changes how we feel about the relationship, awe and reverence in one moment, partnership and equality in the next. The score, composed with live orchestration but interwoven with Nordic folk instruments and experimental soundscapes, is inseparable from the visual language. The filmmakers often let music and image breathe together without dialogue, a practice that gives certain sequences a lyrical, almost balletic quality. There's an extended montage in the second act, a migration of dragons across vast oceans, where the only sound is the swelling score and the whisper of wind. Editing here is musical. Cuts are timed to chord changes, visual beats align with drum hits, and camera sweeps feel choreographed like dance steps. This is not just scoring a film. It's building a scene as a duet between image and sound. Even the film's use of silence is calculated. In the climax, when the final confrontation reaches its peak, the soundtrack drops to near silence save for the ragged breath of the characters and the faraway rumble of the sea. Without the cushion of constant sound, every movement feels exposed, every choice magnified. When the score returns, a full orchestral swell, it's like oxygen flooding back after holding your breath. The visual effects pipeline had to be rethought for this film because of the scale of its set pieces. The animators used new volumetric rendering techniques for clouds and water, meaning those elements behave like physical volumes instead of flat textures. This pays off in moments where dragons burst through low-hanging fog. Light scatters realistically, curling around wingtips and refracting in droplets. Water behaves with convincing weight. When dragons dive into the ocean, the camera sometimes follows beneath the surface, catching the distorted, shimmering forms above. Practicality in animation may sound like an oxymoron, but the filmmakers pursued it relentlessly. They studied the aerodynamics of large birds and gliding mammals, translated that into dragon physiology, and made sure that even the fantasy elements obeyed consistent rules. Editing choices support this realism. They never cut so fast you lose track of movement logic, so your brain always believes what it sees. The box office success of the film is, in many ways, tied to these filmmaking choices. Audiences didn't just come for nostalgia. They came because the marketing emphasized an experience, the chance to feel flight, danger, and wonder in a way that was more visceral than before. The techniques crafted an atmosphere that could be communicated even in trailers, a mix of grounded, lived-in realism and sweeping, mythic adventure. Viewers left talking not only about the plot, but about the way the film felt. The chill of mountain wind, the pulse of a dive, the shimmer of bioluminescent scales in moonlight. Those sensory impressions became part of the word-of-mouth draw, translating directly into repeat ticket sales. Behind the scenes, production was meticulous in ensuring that spectacle didn't overwhelm intimacy. Box office trends often showed diminishing returns for sequels that grow louder but lose emotional connection. The filmmakers avoided that trap by making sure that for every massive aerial battle, there was a quiet fireside scene where character bonds deepened. Editing rhythms between these two modes ensured that audiences didn't burn out on action. Instead, they craved it when it returned. The post-production timeline was extended far beyond typical animated films to allow the sound team to perfect the mix for different viewing environments. The Dolby Atmos version places a viewer at the center of the sky, with dragon calls circling from rear to front speakers, wind currents whooshing overhead, and bass rumbles sync to wing beats. Even the standard stereo mix retains layered clarity. The filmmakers knew that not everyone would see it in a premium theater, so they built the mix to hold its shape on home systems as well. Color grading was another unsung hero of atmosphere. Early Burke scenes are graded with slightly desaturated blues and grays, reflecting the harsher climate and the narrative's initial emotional uncertainty. As the story progresses and relationships are rekindled or repaired, warmer tones slowly creep in, peaking in golden, fiery hues during the climax. This gradual shift is so subtle most viewers don't consciously notice it, but it's felt a subliminal visual arc that mirrors the emotional one. Camera placement during action is perhaps the boldest departure from earlier installments. Instead of always giving the audience the best seat in the house, the filmmakers sometimes place a camera in precarious or obstructed positions, half hidden behind a mast as dragons weave through ship rigging, tumbling with a spinning rider as the horizon twists violently, or momentarily losing sight of the action in a cloud bank before breaking back into sunlight. These choices create a sense of danger and unpredictability. You're not just watching a choreographed sequence, you're caught in it. The result is that the atmosphere of How to Train Your Dragon 2025 is not something that can be summed up as epic or beautiful, though it is both. It's an atmosphere of presence. The filmmaking techniques make you feel like a participant in this world, someone whose breath misses in the cold air, whose ears ring from the rush of wind, whose heart skips with every wing beat. The sound is not just heard but felt. The editing is not just functional but emotional. The camera is not just a witness but a companion. And when the final shot fades, not to a roar of action but to a quiet, lingering look across the horizon, it's clear that every choice, from lighting to lens simulation, from the timing of cuts to the layering of sound, was aimed at giving the audience more than a story. It gives them a memory. The cast of How to Train Your Dragon 2025 felt less like a list of names on a credits reel and more like a tightly knit troupe who had all been given the same precious responsibility: to breathe life into a world beloved for over a decade. From the moment the project was announced, there was speculation, cautious optimism, and even a trace of worry among longtime fans. The animated trilogy had left an emotional mark so deep that any attempt at a live-action adaptation seemed like walking across a frozen lake in spring. Every step had to be carefully measured. The actors knew it. The director knew it. And perhaps most of all, the audiences knew it. What became immediately clear in early interviews was how deeply the cast respected the source material. Mason Thames, stepping into the enormous shoes of Hiccup Horrendous Haddock 3, carried the demeanor of someone who wasn't just playing a role, but taking stewardship of a cultural touchstone. In one interview, he admitted to rewatching the animated films repeatedly, not to mimic Jay Baruchel's voice acting, but to understand the rhythm of Hiccup's evolution, his awkward bravery, his defiance in the face of tradition, and the way he found strength in vulnerability. Thames spoke of finding the human pauses between Hiccup's sentences, the moments when the character's mind was turning faster than his tongue could keep up. It was in those small stumbles and hesitations, he said, that Hiccup felt most real. Alongside him, Nico Parker as Astra Hofferson was a study in balancing steel with softness. Her preparation went far beyond sword drills and horse riding. She talked about learning how to move with a kind of quiet confidence, never hesitating to fight, but also never needing to announce her dominance. In one particularly memorable behind-the-scenes clip, She recalled that the director had told her, "Astrid is a hurricane in the middle of a calm sea." Parker carried that metaphor with her throughout filming, letting Astrid's fierce loyalty and unspoken tenderness unfold naturally. Fans who had once feared that Astrid might be reduced to a simple love interest saw, in Parker's portrayal, a warrior in her own right, someone whose affection was an extension of her courage. Then there was Gerard Butler's return as Stoic the Vast, a decision that thrilled audiences worldwide. For Butler, reprising the role in live action was a deeply personal experience. In animated form, Stoic had been a booming voice, a towering shadow, a mixture of authority and gruff affection. In live action, Butler could add layers of physicality, the weight in his posture, the way he would glance at Hiccup for just a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to reconcile the boy in front of him with the legacy he expected him to carry. Butler spoke in interviews about how the live-action format allowed for subtler expressions, a slow exhale in a moment of doubt, a hand lingering on a shoulder, a half-smile quickly hidden. He called it playing the spaces between the words. Even Toothless, though rendered through cutting-edge CGI and motion capture, felt like part of the cast. The creature's personality, mischievous, proud, loyal, was brought to life by a combination of animators and a motion capture performer who, in interviews, described the challenge of embodying an animal whose intelligence was both alien and oddly human. "It's all in the head, tilts, and the blinks," the performer said. "You have to make the audience believe Toothless is thinking, not just reacting, thinking." As the cast shared these insights, the interviews began to feel like pieces of a larger puzzle, each revealing how the filmmakers had managed to recapture the emotional honesty of the original films. But beyond the press junkets and studio interviews, the real measure came when the film finally reached audiences. Opening night was an event in itself. In theaters across the world, fans arrived wearing Viking helmets, dragon wings, and even full handmade armor. Parents brought their children, some of whom had been born after the original trilogy ended, introducing them to a new gateway into the franchise. The energy was electric, but tinged with apprehension. Could a live-action version possibly capture the magic they remembered? The first screenings told their own story. As the opening scenes unfolded, a hush fell over the theaters, the kind of silence that meant people weren't just watching. They were leaning in. The atmosphere shifted from cautious anticipation to an almost childlike wonder. When Toothless first appeared, the audience reaction was immediate and visceral. There were gasps, then laughter, then that soft collective, that signals hearts have been won over. Online, audience reviews began flooding in within hours. Some came from lifelong fans who admitted they'd been skeptical right up until the opening scene. One particularly moving post came from a viewer who had watched the first animated film as a child with their father, and now, years later, took their own child to see the live-action remake. "It's like I got to introduce my kid to my childhood best friend," they wrote. Another fan praised the film for making Burke feel like a real, living place, noting that the grit and texture of the live sets gave weight to the world in a way animation never could, without losing the whimsical charm. "We trace the techniques that gave the movie its breath, the careful, deliberate choices in cinematography that made light and shadow into characters of their own. We followed the sweep of the camera as it soared alongside dragons through cloud/skies, the lens catching the gleam of sun on a wing, the trembling of wind in a mane. We lingered in the stillness of those quieter shots, where the camera simply observed a human hand resting against warm scales, and the space between them was charged with more meaning than words could carry. The editing was not simply an assembly line of shots. It was a rhythm, a heartbeat, pacing the audience's emotions so that joy and sorrow rose and fell in waves, always arriving at just the right moment. And then there was a sound, the deep, resonant roar of a dragon that seemed to roll through your chest, the rustle of leather harnesses, the sigh of the wind over the sea, the almost imperceptible creak of a longship as it cut through waves. All of it built a world you could feel on your skin. We sat down with the voices behind the magic, cast members who spoke with a kind of reverence for their roles, as though they'd been entrusted with ancient stories passed down through generations. There were smiles when they recalled moments on set, but also a kind of awe when they described scenes that had moved them even before the audience saw them. And we heard from the audience itself, those whose eyes shone with the recognition of something precious being returned to them, Some spoke of growing up with the earlier films, of sitting in dark theaters years ago and falling in love with the idea that dragons could be friends. Others came fresh to the story, marveling at its power to feel both timeless and entirely new. Across age, background, and experience, there was a shared sense of wonder, as if the movie had managed to weave them into the same tapestry. And now, here we are at the edge of it all. In a way, endings are strange illusions. The story will keep living in your mind, in flashes of memory, in the way you might hear a certain note from the score days later and be transported right back to the sky. It will live in the questions it leaves you with, the feelings it stirs, the quiet realization that maybe you've been carrying your own kind of dragon all along. Something wild, something beautiful, something worth protecting. But before we let this curtain fall completely, there's something I want you to remember. This conversation doesn't have to end here. The magic of cinema, especially of films like How to Train Your Dragon, 2025, is that they create communities, small islands where people who felt the same awe, the same laughter, the same lump in their throat, can find each other. That's what this space is for. This channel exists to keep that conversation alive, to keep digging into the craft, the symbolism, the hidden threads that make a film more than moving images on a screen. If you found yourself reliving moments from this movie while listening to this, if you felt that familiar rush of discovering something deeper beneath the surface, then you're exactly where you need to be. There's so much more to explore, not just in this film, but in the vast ocean of cinema that waits for us. Every story we unpack here, every scene we examine, adds to a growing map of understanding, connecting dots between art, culture, and the human spirit. So, as you step back into your own world, whether that a quiet night in your room or the bustling hum of city streets, carry a piece of this film with you. Let it remind you that the impossible can be made real, that beauty can be found in unexpected friendships, and that courage often means choosing connection over fear. And if you want to keep exploring, to keep chasing the stories that make us feel this way, then stay with me. Subscribe, not because of what everyone says at the end of the video, but because it's an invitation to keep sharing this journey. There are more skies to fly through, more dragons to meet, more hidden treasures buried in the art of storytelling. Let's find them together. And maybe, just maybe, the next time the lights go down and the first frame flickers onto the screen, you'll remember this moment. You'll know that somewhere out there, others are feeling that same spark, that same magic, and that you're not alone in it. The story never truly ends. It only waits for the next telling.